is my system audio always weird? Hello. We're messing around with AirPods again. There we go. Thank you. Let's set some focus. 1 hour. All right, welcome everybody. Oh, always doing something when the camera starts up. Cool. So, without touching. This is a little interesting thing in Laravel, and I don't use it very often, but literally every time I need it, I always have to remember how it's done. And I seem to always land on this 12-year-old post of how to do it. And, it works, it kind of works, some of it still works, even though, even though this is like Laravel 4 and talks about Laravel 3, and we're on Laravel 11, like this old school timestamps false, is kind of like still how you do it. It's kind of like still how you do it. There's another method that you can do without touching on. It's not even a method, actually. You wrap your stuff in a closure. Anyway, let's go look at the ways in which you can do without touching, because again, I stumble upon this like once every 6 months. I don't use it a lot. Maybe it's not used a lot. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you've ever needed to disable timestamps. But there's some real world application for this, actually. Like there's not. This isn't like random. I don't do this for no reason. There are plenty of examples. I have 4 or 5 of them in LaravelShift.com alone. Okay, so for example, Shift does a lot of background automation, right? It does a lot of background jobs. It does a lot of overnight commands, some scheduled tasks run. And each one of these may do things in the database. So again, real world examples are I send a follow-up email to people that run new shifts or the first time they've run a shift. I may tag I flag their user record. Well, if I touch the timestamps, I'm updating their updated batch, which may display somewhere in the system, more specifically for a shift. I send a follow-up email for that particular shift. I flag it in a database that certain emails have been sent, and now it changes your updated at for the order. Well, I don't want it to do that because the updated at is more or less when it was ran. So it can make things affect wonky inside of the system, or people with subscriptions to Shift have repositories. Those repository versions, the Laravel version for those repositories are fetched each night. Again, updated at gets flagged. So there are reasons that you may, in your applications, want to turn this off. So I think it's, again, it's not something you do all the time, because once you turn it off, you never really need to change that code again, theoretically. We'll see. But the point is that you do this. You don't do it often, but you need to go find and remember how to do it. And the funny thing is like, I was actually Googling this, and if I do like site laravel.com/docs and do without touching, it's like there's nowhere in here that it actually does anything about without touching. So it's not even really documented. So again, it's kind of like this elusive feature that you have to remember all the time. So I want to get to the bottom of it. I want to understand the difference of some of the new methods that are in there, some of the different ways you can do it, some of the timestamps, the pros and cons of each, right? Like, how do we do it in those scenarios? So I think what I'm going to do is just make a test in Laravel Shift. I'm not necessarily going to change any real world code per se, but I'm going to make a test that does each one of the different ways, and we can assert that the timestamp was not changed, right? So let's go write up some tests. We'll write some implementation and kind of tweak it back and forth to see if the test continues to pass, when it passes, when it fails, so forth. And if everything's still pretty ugly like this is just how you do it, this 12-year-old post is just how you do it, maybe there's an opportunity to PR something into Laravel 11 or the upcoming Laravel 12, right? If there's some kind of breaking change or new thing we can do here. So I just think there's an opportunity. It's a super tiny paper cut. Again, Laravel's awesome. It's got all this cool stuff. But just again, once every 6 months, there's like this little thing that I do inside of the framework, and I'm like, oh yeah, how do you do that again? And I just think it could be it could be a bit smoother. I always kind of end up feeling let down compared to how like fresh and new the rest of Laravel is. It's like, wait a second, I set timestamps equal to false. This seems strange. Like I get it, I understand why you do that, but it is not smooth, I don't think. Okay, so PHP artisan make test. It doesn't really matter if it's a unit test or not. Let's just call it without touching test. Cool. Okay, let's go into without touching test. And again, it's just kind of an example test. Let's use refresh database. Yep, that's good. And what we can do here, we don't even need to make any calls to anything. This is really kind of more unit test, if you will. But let's just make a user. So user create, or oops, user factory create. All right, let's bring in this. Okay, this will set an updated at. So what I want to do is I want to say original equals user updated at. This is automatically cast as a carbon, all that kind of stuff. Now we're going to want to freeze time, right? We want to kind of control time, if you will. I think Laravel's got a really nice way to do this. I always forget about it. It's like wormhole. There's something about wormhole. You travel, set back. We like set it. I always forget. That's another one of the fancy things. That's actually the other end of the extreme. It's super fancy, like tap and all this other stuff. And it's like, oh God, I got to read about how to use this every single time. Like, it's like, I think I know, but then it's like, oh, I don't. But that's the other end of the extreme. That's like super big brain, cool little thing. The way I know how to do it is carbon set test. We can do it this way. And we just set it to like, now or something. Let's bring in illuminate supports carbon. Set test now, sorry. Okay, cool, here we go. Set test now. What does this take? Does it take a date? It takes mixed. It takes anything that can just be set, right? I think it just parses it, yeah. So we should be able to make another carbon date. I just want to make sure that this date is like obvious enough that we can just simply test it. So I think what we'll do is we'll just say fake. I'll just say fake something, and let's say carbon make. Is it make or create? Create from date. Yeah, that's fine. Let's just do this. 2025 1. Let's just make it last week, Friday, right? I don't care about any of the rest of the stuff, right? So we'll set test now to fake. And then basically if we call user update, we don't even need an implementation. We can just write it here and then test it. So again, this is a very simple test, but we'll basically just say, let's update, what is in here? Email, I guess. Let's update this to some kind of like this faker safe email, right? And let's bring in faker. I don't care what it is. We could just make it the same email address if we want, but we'll be fun with faker and so forth. All right, that should come in. Faker comes in. Okay, so now to prove that this kind of just works the way we would expect, we basically would say this assert same or assert true. We're going to need to use carbon. So we'll assert true that user updated at is equal to fake. Now, two things. One, we could also go so far as to say like assert not equals. This would always pass, but we can just throw it in here. So we could say this is not equal to original. I think you have to use assert false. Equal, yeah. We would do equal original. This would kind of always pass in fairness, but let's just do that. And then one more thing, we need to actually say user refresh. We got to pull the latest copy from the database. Okay, so we've made a sample user. We're doing database, refresh database, so this will actually run the migrations. Now it's going to run it for the whole Laravel Shift application, which is kind of unnecessary, but whatever. We need the user table. We get the original. We're going to store this off. Again, this is a carbon date underneath because it gets cast automatically by Eloquent. We're going to make our own little date to last Friday or whatever day that is. Then we're going to set the test now. That way, anytime now or anything like that is used within the code of the framework or our application, it's going to be this date. So we're just going to update the email address because I think that's fillable. We'll refresh it, meaning we'll pull the latest data from the database for that user record. And then we're basically going to make sure that the updated at is not the original one. So it got changed. We expect it to get changed, but in this case, it should be changed to this. Now, again, this is a little bit redundant, but it's just going to be here for an easy way to make sure that we're setting this and changing this or not changing this as expected as we start to change this code. So you can think about this as like our implementation, right? So this is like implementation. This is like our implementation code. So really right here, we would be acting on the application or something, but we're just going to put all the code here in the test. And this is just going to be an easy way for us to continue to test it ourselves, continue to run this as we start changing that implementation code. So if I go vendor bin PHP unit, that, we get a failure. So failed to starting that false is true, line 30. So let's see what's wrong here. Line 30. Okay, so for some reason the without touching is not set up. I'm wondering if this automatically gets some kind of timestamp or something. So let's do two things, just so we don't have to guess all the time. Let's say updated. The updated at column was not changed. All right, and then here we'll say the updated at column was not updated. So just to get a little bit fuller of what's, okay, so the updated at column was not changed. Okay, according to this, the updated at column was not changed. Wait a second. Oh, sorry, was not updated. Already read that wrong. Look at that. Okay, so what is updated at then? Let's do two things. Let's dump this, format that to just like R or something, just a full, I think that's like Adam's date. And then let's also make fake. My guess is there's some microsecond precision or a timestamp that's happening here. Okay, so these are indeed the same. So why is Carbon not liking these? Is there something about equal? Is there something about equal here? Let's dump fake equal. Is there something about this? Oh, is it equal or equal to? I think there's a difference. Maybe that's the problem. User updated at. It's true. Why is, updated at. It's false. Why are you false? Why did you fail? Is equal not what I think it is? No, equal is just an alias for equal to. Why would these not discourage null, discourage boolean, resolve carbon? Okay. Why are these? I would expect this to pass. What am I missing here? Updated at got changed, right? Got changed to last Friday. So it did work on our fake time. Why is it not equal to our fake bit? Are we doing any kind of like weird immutability stuff here? No. User updated at format. We're after the refresh. What in the world? Why aren't these equal? Why aren't you equal? Prove my point. Prove my point. It's always something little with dates. This is why dates are funky. This shouldn't have got muted. Just for giggles, we could make this immutable. I don't think it'll really change anything, but let's just check. It's still false. According to the formatting, they're the same. What's the difference in equal? There's no difference in equal to, so this equals this. Oh, wait a second. Do they have to be now with same TZ? Are the time zones different somehow? Is one pulling like the app time zone and the other's not? No, I create them both in the application using Laravel, so it should take, I mean, it's UTC anyway, but it should take the time zone. Yeah, this on the surface, this seems like it would pass, but there's got to be something. There's some minor difference here. Let's take off the format and just look at the raw objects. There's definitely a tiny, tiny difference that's happening underneath here. Okay, so this, our second one is, here's some millisecond precision here and UTC. Now again, we should be faking it. Okay, yeah. There's some millisecond precision that's happening here. Look at that. There's some millisecond stuff that's happening. Okay, I think you can create without milliseconds or something, or without, what is that? It's like, there's like some kind of sub millisecond, sub millis, no. There's like a without. Oh, I've used this before. Another weird thing that I've used before, but you kind of like need to. Let's see, millisecond. Milliseconds. I think there's a way to like reset milliseconds or something, or start. It's like start of minute. That's what it is. Start of minute. There we go. Let's try this. Yay, all is good in the world. Stupid milliseconds. Okay, I knew it was something stupid. Okay, let's get rid of all these little dumps and let's recap our sidetrack there. Okay, so it wasn't necessarily an immutability thing. We're not like adding or subtracting here, but always good to use immutable carbon objects just to avoid that kind of scenario that might have happened. Nuno's got actually a really good short on that in examples as well. So if you're not familiar, he just did like one of his daily live streams, just the other day. So anyway, we basically take that date. It actually ended up with a little bit of milliseconds inside of it between here and when we actually set it. The set test now actually, I guess it compares that to the current now and took some milliseconds. So the difference between this and this line, there was just like 0.0546, as we saw on the dump, milliseconds that happened. So by making this start of minute, we're actually zeroing those out and preventing set test and now from like merging those with the now timestamp. It's a little funky that this actually does that, in my opinion. I think it should just like do that for you personally, but I don't know. Anyway, I've run into this before, so you really just need to like make sure to set like a very specific time zone, start of minute. This can bite you depending on if your tests are slow or fast or whatever. So anyway, this is all behaving as we expect now. The updated at is not equal to the original anymore, so it did get changed. And then updated at is equal to our fake one because we're setting that within Laravel now to always use our fake time. So now to the actual point of the stream. We got a good test, so now we're actually going to change our implementation here to do other things to see if this works. So the easiest thing to do here, we can follow the example here, right? We can get a user, we can set timestamps to false, and then we can save it. So let's just do this. So let's change this code. Instead of age, we're going to use email. And instead of the email or age that they have here, we'll dump this here. So these are roughly equivalent, right? These are basically the same thing, just a little more code here to do all of that. And then why is our underscored read property? You are? Okay, whatever. I don't think so. All right, let's run this again. And, well, sorry, let's run this again, and it should still pass. This is the same as the update call. So let's make sure this still passes. Test already exists. Oh, sorry, up arrowed too far. Okay, this all still passes, good. Now, if I uncomment this, I would expect it to say the updated column was not changed, right? It's whatever originally was there from our factory. Good, we got a failure. A call to undefined, okay, so call to a member function equal on a string. Interesting. Are our date casts not? Call to undefined member function on a string. User refresh. Why is that a string? Why is user updated at a string? We set timestamps to false. Oh, this is part of the drawback. This is one of the gotchas by using timestamps false. I believe, I don't want to jump the gun, but I believe this is one of the issues. So if I say user timestamps equal to true now, after I run save, I get the casting back into a carbon date. But because I set it to false, farther down in my code, well, that updated at's just a string when I ask for it now, right? So let's change this. I think we're going to get a failure steer, but a different one. Yes, the updated column was not changed, right? So really what we're expecting here is if I comment this out, I'm going to run through this again, but let me just comment this out and get this back to passing. If we go back down here and we say assert true, run this, we should pass. Okay, so let's review the code here again. Okay, so what we're doing in our new implementation, just to kind of demonstrate that this timestamps false works, but has a gotcha to it. Okay, everything's set up the same, but our implementation changed. In this case, we're not calling update here. We're going to now set timestamps to false. We're going to change the email address as expected. Then we're going to call save. We now assert that the updated at is the same as the original one right after we made it, right? It doesn't change to our fake date or anything like that. So that's good. That worked, but it has a side effect. You need to re-enable timestamps on your current execution of code, because otherwise, when you go and get an attribute, in this case, the updated at attribute, it will not automatically cast it because it thinks that timestamps is false, right? You told it timestamps is false, so it's not going to cast it anymore. And now you just get a string representation of what's saved in the database, not a carbon object. So there's an example of, yes, this works, but it's a bit of a gotcha, right? I'm surprised that order refresh doesn't do it, but again, we're in the current execution of the page. That would matter in a Laravel application between your user controller and your user view. If you turn timestamps off in this capacity, right, that would still matter. Now your view is thinking updated at's a string, right? If you were displaying it, you could get a very odd error in your code like we saw in our tests. So yes, update timestamp setting to false works, but it has very big side effects in how those columns now behave, how your model now behaves underneath. So again, yeah, it works, but not, exactly the way you might expect it to work. You would have to remember to turn this back on. So let's try another example. I left this update. Let's put timestamps false here in this update and see if the same gotcha is there and see if it still behaves the way we would expect, right? So let me turn this off. Let's bring this back on. Let's get all our different implementations here. And then here we're going to say timestamps false. Can you set it here? See, I think there's another gotcha. I don't think you can set it inside of here. I think the only time you can do timestamps false is when you're kind of setting that property directly. I don't think Eloquent knows that this is a fillable field, so it doesn't set the property for you. I think that was the gotcha. I don't know. Could be very wrong here. Let me toggle that back on. Let's see if this passes. I would expect this to be green if everything's kind of self-contained and works. Or I would expect the string error if we have the same issue where timestamps is now not getting disabled. Yeah, so the updated at column was not changed. Failed asserting that false is true. So let's put this back again, assert false. And let's put this back. This is back to our original implementation, meaning that the timestamp is changing to our fake date. and that's passing. So the gotcha here is that timestamps false cannot be used in an update statement. You can't set it like you set at other columns. It would have to be set beforehand. So to get this to work, they have another method. And it's called without timestamps. And it's not even in line, okay? It's not even in line like this. It's actually what you have to do, and again, it's not documented, but I discovered this long ago. What you have to do is you have to say without touching, and then you make a little closure of the command you actually want to run in isolation. So this, right? So I basically say user without touching. This is going to disable the timestamps and do all those things. And then it's going to update the email address. So we'll toggle this code back here in a second, but we should see a failure here on this line. I would expect to see that the updated at column was not changed because it's the same. So let's run this. Oh, nope, still passing. Okay, so why didn't without touching why did this not work the way I thought? I would have expected a failure here because we say without touching. So turn without touching on. We've got a callable. So we turn this on, static, ignore on touch values. Okay, try callback. Okay, so it should call our closure. And then when that's done, it should ignore touching on array values diff, theoretically flopping them back. What did I miss here? Is it without timestamps or without touching? Without timestamps. What's the difference? Without timestamps on. What's the difference between touching and timestamps? The list of models. Nope. Let's see if this works the way I want. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we're going to explore that too. What's the difference between without timestamps and without touching? Anyway, line updated at column was not changed. Okay, good. This worked the way I wanted. So let's go back here. Let's turn this one back off. Well, you know what? I'm tired of turning these on and off. Let's format all this. Let's borrow this and say when updated at changes. Cool. And then let's do another one of when or without touching. Yeah, I want to get to the bottom of what's the difference between without timestamps and without touching, but let's get in there in a second. Let's get this running. So let's go back to true here. And this is the updated column at was changed if it failed. Okay. So now if we turn this off, I would expect this to pass. I would expect this to be green. Okay, cool. There's one more thing I want to do. I might have not given this user update a fair shake. I think inside of here, similarly to the problem we just had, I think you're supposed to say updated at equals false. I think you're supposed to say that, not timestamps equals false. So let's do this and see if it passes. It does not. The updated at column was changed. So it's not false. Is it time? Did I say timestamps a minute ago? I think I did. Yeah. Updated at. It's not false. Can you do null? Nope. So there's no way to even just say in here like updated at false, timestamps false. Is it like touching in here? Can you say touching false? No, none of that works. Okay, so none of that works. That's a no-go. All right. Let's bring this one back to passing. Okay. So two things. One, this is a lot. This is like, to me, that's a lot of code to write to do the without touching, right? Or the without timestamps. So first of all, I don't think this is documented anywhere. Let's go find out. I don't think this is documented. Let's look for that. Eloquent, getting started. Eloquent relationships. Are you in here? No without timestamps. Is anything in here without timestamps? Here we go. What's this? Here we go. If you would like to perform model operations without having its updated at timestamp modified, you may operate on the model within a closure given. Okay, so exactly what. Okay, so it is documented. In fairness, it is documented. This is the documented way to do it. So what it seems like is this is a bit legacy, but it still works with side effects. The other caveat that I've seen here, and we're not going to go so deep into this, but I've seen it in other things that kind of temporarily disable state, and you'll see a PR like fixing this every now and then. But this is like model without timestamps, right? It's not necessarily scoped to the specific post model. So, for example, if you were updating multiple things, or you had some kind of nested, parent-child type relationships, or maybe you were running a couple different things, you now have to make sure that those are separated, right? You need to say model without timestamps, for that specific thing, and then unbreak your other one out, because it either will turn off the timestamps for all of the things that you're saving, which you may not want, or an inner thing that you had disabled them for will now disable them for the other things you're trying to save as well. So the point here is that if you have any kind of nested query or anything that might touch multiple records across different models, and you use things like this closure, you just have to be careful that the order of operations in which they get turned on and off can make it more complex. It can make it more complex. Generally speaking though, I don't feel like, I understand that this works and this is nice and everything, but I wish there was a smoother way. I wish it was just a little bit smoother. That's all. I'd really like if there was a user, without timestamps, I guess is fine. I wish I could chain it here is the point, right? I wish I could do that. That would be cool, I think. I understand why you have to wrap it in the closure because you got to turn it on and off. But I feel like you could make an inline version of this. And I'm just thinking it through for a second. Before we go down this road, I just want to spend one more minute. What is the difference between without timestamps and without touching? Let's go look this up. Okay, disables timestamps for the current class during the given callback scope. Okay, so static without timestamps on static class. Okay, so what that's going to do is it's going to say without timestamps on the user. So this is where they try to get around some of that complexity. If you simply say model, right, it doesn't necessarily, that's just doing it high up on Eloquent. It doesn't necessarily know what that is. So it's just doing it on all models. So the point here is that some of that stuff where I was talking about nested child, whatever, I think if you make sure to say which model you want to turn it off on, in this case user, you'll kind of get a little bit of safety there because it's only going to apply it to the static one, the dynamic one that's running, in this case user. If I said model, then it doesn't know what it is. It's just going to pass down model here, and everything's a model, right? So if I go to save something on my shifts, maybe those timestamps get turned off too, right? So let's dig a little deeper. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to say models, array values, merge, static ignore timestamps on with models. So I effectively take models and I add it into this array that the list of models that we've temporarily disabled that on. Okay, fine. And then I just get the values to get rid of any key mismatches there. So I just array values. So now it's, 0 model, 1 user, etc., is all in there. It calls the callback, in our case, the closure with the update on the user record of the email address. And then it goes through each of the models after the try. It goes through each of the models. and it says, okay, if the model is in the ignore timestamps, then unset that particular key. For each models. Without timestamps on for each models. Why wouldn't they just... Oh, it gets passed in. I see. It gets passed in. Because you could set this in a couple different places of the code, right? So again, I think this for each is written this way, again, because it kind of systematically removes the ones just for this instance that you've called it. And therein lies the rub. That's why this one is a little bit tough. You have to track which model you're doing this for, right? And that's why something like inline like this it's not impossible, but it would be pretty complex, because you would have to know that specific model had the timestamps disabled on when you call to update. Again, it's not impossible. Let's just look at update real quick. I'm just curious. Update's in model. You have attributes. Oh, you have options. Does save options? Save options is the one with the timestamps. Is that true? Save options is the one. Where's options used? I think the save options are the ones where that has the timestamps. Yeah, finish save. Here we go. Finish save. Options touch owners, touch owner. Okay, okay, so there's our other answer. Without timestamps just doesn't update the timestamps fields. Touching will update the timestamp fields on the parents as well. So I think without touching, just make sure that you don't do that to like other parent records, right? This relationship touch, which I think bumps the updated at on those. Touch the owning relations of the model. I think this might be part of the issue with Shift, is that I do use the without timestamps, but maybe something else is touching the owning. That's interesting. It doesn't look like we use options anywhere else in save. So I was thinking, did we use like, was timestamps in an option, right? Let me just demonstrate what I'm talking about here. Let's comment this back out, because that's kind of a different path. Let's take this part. Let's cut that out. Let's take this part. And I think what I'm curious about is if I use the touching bit, if I use touch false as an option, does this work? Maybe the way I'm thinking. Okay, leave the without. Okay, so this, whoops. Comment that out. We don't want any side effects. Does this pass? No, it does not. The updated at column was changed. Can timestamps be in here? Timestamps? Nope. No such thing. No such thing as the timestamps option. Where does timestamps actually get bumped when you do this? So it has fill attributes. It calls save. Merge attributes from cache cast. Fire event saving. Perform update. It must be in perform update. Yeah, uses timestamps. Update timestamps. There you go. So this timestamps and static is ignoring timestamps. This class, it checks those things we just looked at. Okay, yeah. So, yeah. I think the thing to do yeah. Sorry. I'm thinking in my head. I'm not thinking out loud. Um, I think if there were a PR, this would be it. I think this is a bit pie in the sky and would require touching. Sorry, let me use a different. It would require changes in so many different spots of model and potentially builder that the PR wouldn't get merged. I know the team's like really minimal, really risk averse to changing anything inside of these kinds of core, base, fundamental, heavily used classes of the framework. Taylor has said this many times in PRs and QAs and all that stuff. Like, they really don't want to touch these classes unless they kind of like absolutely have to. So I think something like this, while very fluid, very fluent, isn't probably something that's very feasible. Because it's not universal. Like, do you do save here too? Like, and what is this really doing underneath? Is it just automatically toggling that on and off? Like, you could make it work. I think you can make it work. I mean, really all you're doing right here is this method. This method would essentially turn it on it would kind of disable timestamps for you. It would basically set it to false. I think the simplest implementation would be to set it to false in this method and then save, update, anything else after they've fired would potentially set it back to true if it were disabled, right? So yeah, it's not like a crazy amount of changes. It's just there's risk there, right? Like, if somebody called user without timestamps and then did a bunch of other code, I don't know. I mean, that's effective to doing this, right? It has side effects. Like, it's effective to do this. What's nice about save or update, being chained, is that it would turn that back on. But there's not a lot of like what I would call intent here. Like, you have to call save or update for kind of the intent of what you're doing to really end up playing out. Whereas this is very like explicit, right? There's like implicit intent here, whereas this is pretty explicit. You're saying like, okay, for the thing in this closure, for the code that's wrapped in this closure, don't do any timestamps for that code. Whereas this is kind of like, hey, turn off the timestamps because I'm, probably going to call save or update later, and then go ahead and turn that back on for me because it's in a chain. But it's kind of just like, it's in the chain because that's the way you're supposed to write it. It's kind of implicit that that's the way you write it. It's assumed that that's the way you write it. Whereas this is like, no, if you don't put anything in closures, just nothing happens, right? There's no side effect. This has side effects. So I think that's a no-go is the long story short. That's a no-go. I think what I would want to see is this. Let's just hack on this for like 5 minutes and see where it goes, right? Where does this go? Can I do that? I want this code right here to pass. Can I make this pass in like under 10 minutes? Okay, it's failing right now because it's changing the updated icon. Can I make this pass in less than 10 minutes? Let's go in here and see if we can. All we really need to do is, I think, would say, we call save, we call options. We could pass options down and do a bunch of stuff and this, that, and the other, right? I mean, I think that would be the right way to do it, is you probably now pass options down into save. But what does this do? Uses timestamps, update timestamps. Perform insert. So the simplest way to make this pass, yeah. The simplest way to make this pass would be to say, take this And you basically, yeah, let me edit it. So we basically say like model. And here we would say this timestamps is false. We need to wrap this. So we say if options timestamps. It may not be set, so we could say like if it's not empty. That would mean it's set and it's not false, meaning it's true. It's some kind of true. Again, this is just quick code. This would need to be like cleaned up. But basically, if we say, well, let's do it right. If is set options and options timestamps is equal to false. All right, if you explicitly set that option and you set it to false, we're going to turn it to false. Then we're going to need to toggle it back. We're basically recreating the other function, but we're just giving it a fair chance here, right? And then here we would go back to setting it to, technically speaking, you would set it back to whatever its original value was, right? And again, that's why this is hacky, but this would work. We're assuming that we would then set it back to what it was, right? And then we would need to return model. So temporary var, we kind of wrap this in some toggling code. Again, not pretty, but it works. And then we effectively say, okay, if you pass in timestamps and it's false, then we're going to set it to false. Otherwise, and we actually would want to honor it. We would want to honor if it was true too. Like you could have timestamps false kind of globally set somewhere, but you want to, for this particular one, you want to allow it. Like you could flip it. So again, there's a lot of scenarios to cover to make this truly work, but I think this would probably end up passing. If we set it to false, we turn it off, and then we have to turn it back on afterwards. Now again, we're making some assumptions, and then we return model the way we used to be. So a couple lines of code, this should pass. And it does. Let's make sure that we just totally didn't break anything else. So let's turn, where's our original one? So let's comment the without touching and go back to when it's updated, and let's take this part off. And that passes. Okay, cool. So we didn't break anything crazy. And we added another option that could be passed down. And theoretically, well, we don't pass this to save, actually. That's where you would kind of want to refactor this code. But save takes options, I think, yeah. So ideally, you'd want to do the same thing here too, like timestamps is false, right? And it's like just for this single run, we would want that to work. So let's turn this off. Let's just keep going here. So we set email. This is false because we haven't done it down in save. So this is kind of where you'd probably want to do it, right? We call finish save. This says option, yeah, options touch, question mark true. Okay, cool. Yeah. So, yeah, you'd kind of have to know that like update, you'd want to know that update changed. Where is update? Here it is. Oh, we commented it out. Boop, boop. So yeah, you'd kind of want to know that like this thing called save underneath, you could leverage that, right? So let's pull the code down farther and see if we could still get it to work, right? So we could say return, and let's take this code out. Let's go down into save. We're making a query. If the modeler exists, we can just update our record that is already in the database. Okay, so perform update, perform insert. Okay, so it needs to happen. It needs to happen here. Yeah, finish save if it actually was saved. And return saved. So we would put this in here. We could do their fancy little thing here. Just leave it alone. Who cares? this timestamp's false, and then all the way back down here, we would toggle it back to true, theoretically. Now again, we'd have to respect those toggles a little better. There's a lot of code paths here that can fail and do other things, but they would end up throwing an exception. And so it's like, who cares, right? The code just dies anyway. But yeah, the problem is like if you call updating and updating returns false, did you really want to turn off the timestamps? You know, you kind of got to put the timestamps back on. There's a lot of paths. There's a lot of paths to, but we're just kind of seeing if we can make this work. And we can. So we can make it work both ways. We can add an option of timestamps false, which I don't think is super clean. It doesn't feel like very fluent, you know, fresh surfer Laravel stuff, but like it's better than timestamps false and having the side effect that we got earlier. So yeah, whoops, we had this still on. Let's save works, all right? And then update still works because it just passes down the option. So both of those work, and compared to this should work too. Okay, so there's 3 different ways. Let's recap and finish it up. There's 3 different ways you can do this. There's 4 different ways you can do this. No, wait, let's go back. I wrote this code. There's 2 different ways that you can do this. You can do it by setting timestamps false yourself, the public property on your model to timestamps false. However, you may only do that if you maintain control, right? It has a side effect of if you turn that off for the rest of the processing of your code, for the rest of that quote unquote request or whatever, for the rest of that runtime of your code, of your application code, Laravel Eloquent specifically will no longer cast updated at. So even though it has a value, it will no longer be automatically cast to a carbon object, right? So you're going to get funky errors like we saw. Hey, you can't call, you know, EQ or format or whatever carbon thing you're trying to call on a string because it's no longer cast to a carbon object. It's just a string value that came from the database. So the point there is that you have to make sure that you then, you know, right after you're done with whatever code, you have to manually set timestamps back to true, okay? So you have to toggle it off and then toggle it back on. There's no inline timestamps. There's no inline option. Maybe there's an opportunity to do that, maybe. But it seems like the preferred way, and for the reasons of remembering the toggle on and toggle off, that without timestamps, wrapping your code in this closure is kind of the way you have to do it, right? You have to do that because it gives you the best chance at toggling it on and off without really having to think about it. It sucks you kind of have to wrap your code in a closure. It's probably there's probably some gotchas in there if you have a pretty deep query or you're needing to turn off other things like we saw, like touching or whatever. So there's some stuff there. I think there's some gotchas even with this. There's some gotchas on both sides. I don't like that I have all this extra syntax just to kind of turn that off. While it's a little bit gross, you know, it's a little bit low-level PHP-ish. Like, I do kind of like, because this options things exist, being able to maybe piggyback that with the timestamps false. But really, all it's doing is the same thing this is doing. It's just turning it on and off during that specific operation, in this case, update or save. So, I don't know. Let me know what you think in the chat, Twitter, whatever, reach out. You know, maybe that's worth it. I don't really know. It is pretty isolated to one spot, and I bet you could probably just piggyback this anyway if you really tried. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's really worth it at the end of the day. So I think the takeaway from the whole video, the point of the live stream was like, when do you use what? And I think the takeaway is this is the way you do it. It's the only documented way, in fairness. This is the way you do it. I'm still interested when withoutTouching applies. I'm still interested when like these two things would maybe like overlap or coalesce or whatever. Like, what's the difference? Would you wrap them? Would you wrap the wrapping like in itself? I don't know. So maybe that's something else for another stream, but I've never had to use the touching bit. Maybe I'll go find this bug and shift, and maybe that is the issue. Something's touching a parent model. I'm not exactly sure. So, but anyway, hope you enjoyed that little bit of fun there. Fun little test writing, fun little testing with dates and some of the gotchas there, such as sub-second or time zone, differences. But also, yeah, the framework still supports a 12-year-old way of turning off timestamps. But it seems like the modern, less gotcha-y way is to use this closure. So that's that. Thanks everybody for joining live. See you all next Wednesday.